Administration of Lyndon Johnson during the time he serves out the remainder of Kennedy's term. And he'll be running in his own election in 1964. Now, we haven't told you a lot about Lyndon Johnson. I think what you know about Lyndon Johnson from the first semester and half of a quarter is he was John Kennedy's vice president. He wasn't too involved in the Kennedy administration, was he? As far as the Kennedy assassination, he was certainly there and was in the motorcade. Also was rushed out of Parkland after they found out he was not injured, sworn into office on Air Force One, and that's kind of where we're at. So before we start here, I kind of want to give you a profile on Lyndon Johnson, tell you a little bit about him, because it's going to be much different than John Kennedy. He and John Kennedy did not have a lot in common, okay? So we'll start with a profile on Lyndon Johnson. Now, Lyndon Baines Johnson, B-A-I-N-E-S, Lyndon Baines Johnson, was born on August 27, 1908, in a farmhouse near Stonewall, Texas. Okay, Lyndon Baines Johnson was born on August 27, 1908, in a farmhouse near Stonewall, Texas. Now remember, that's that was the final destination that Kennedy was going to take on his day in Dallas, as they were going to go. He was going to speak at a $100 a plate dinner, remember, in Austin, and they were going to retire to Lyndon Johnson's ranch in Stonewall, Texas. So he was born on August 27, 1908, in a farmhouse near Stonewall, Texas. He was the oldest of 5 children. He had 1 brother and 3 sisters. Okay, he was the oldest of 5 children, having 1 brother and 3 sisters. Oldest of 5 children, 1 brother, 3 sisters. When he was 5 years old, his family moved from Stonewall, Texas, to nearby Johnson City, Texas. So at the age of 5, the Johnson family moved from Stonewall, Texas, to nearby Johnson City, Texas. That seemed kind of different, since his name was Johnson. It was actually named after his grandfather. Okay, so the town was named after his grandfather. So at the age of 5, the Johnson family moved from Stonewall, Texas, to nearby Johnson City, Texas, which was a town that was founded and named after his grandfather. So he goes to elementary school and junior high, so to speak, and in 1924 he graduates from high school in Johnson City. 1924 he graduates from high school in Johnson City. And what do you think his parents do? Urge him to do what? Go to college. Okay, that's kind of what parents do. But he wasn't interested at the time. Okay, he wasn't interested. So in 1924, Lyndon Johnson graduated from high school in Johnson City, Texas. His parents urged him to go to college, but he was not interested. So he went to the College of Hard Knocks, which is what? What?
Military school.
No, not quite that hard knocks. Just went to work, got a job. Okay? So he got a job, he worked for a period of time. Now he worked that job for a period of time, and he sat down one night and he told his parents, quote, you don't have to write this down, he said, "I'm sick of working with my hands. I don't know if I can work with my brain, but I'm ready to try." So he did a lot of things that some kids do. They're not ready to go to college, went to work, and he thought, this isn't that fun. So I think I'm smart enough to go to college. So he borrowed $75 from the Johnson City Bank, and he enrolled at Southwest Texas Teachers College. So after telling his family he was sick of working with his hands, and he didn't know if he could work with his brain, but he was ready to give it a try, he went to a local bank in Johnson City, borrowed $75, and enrolled at Southwest Texas Teachers College, where he graduated. So obviously, what was he going to become? A teacher. That's what all doesn't exist now, but that's what the college did, is they produce teachers.
Can you repeat the name of the college?
Yeah, Southwest Texas Teachers College. Well, he went and got a job after graduation at Sam Houston High School in Houston, Texas. Went and got a job at Sam Houston High School in Houston, Texas. Taught there 1 year. And after his 1 year at Sam Houston High School, he decided to enter politics. So he only served as a teacher 1 year. Must have had enough, I don't know. So after college graduation, he taught for 1 year at Sam Houston High School in Houston, Texas, and then decided to enter politics. Well, he didn't run for office right away, obviously. He had to get some experience. So his first political job, he was a congressional secretary. Now don't take that as someone that dictates notes and those types of things. He was a congressional secretary. Does anybody want to guess what a congressional secretary did? Now that I hinted a little bit and told you it wasn't someone that was like what you're feeling of a secretary.
You get mail.
Shh, what was that? Kind of, that's part of it. How about another guess? What does a congressional secretary do?
Make copies.
No, not so much that type of stuff. But Saskia, say what you said again.
Research for congressman?
Research, that's kind of what he would do. Research to do what? Okay, what's it?
Did you look
What-
at old court cases?
No, actually what a congressional secretary does is they campaign for certain politicians. So they may be researching some things, like Saskia said, to try to get their candidate reelected. So they generally go to work for a congressman or senator, and they campaign for them. They're in their office and they campaign and kind of keep them organized, okay? Now the man that LBJ served for was Congressman Richard Kleberg, who's on your ID sheet. That's who he served as Congressional Secretary to Richard Kleberg. So Lyndon Johnson served as a Congressional Secretary to Congressman Richard Kleberg from 1932 until 1937. Okay, 1932 to 1937. Lyndon Johnson served as a Congressional Secretary to Congressman Richard Kleberg. So what branch of Congress was Kleberg in? Senate or House? If you're a congressman. Not a senator, he's in the House. Okay? Congressman is a member of the House, a senator is a senator. Now, Lyndon Johnson practically ran Kleberg's office. Kleberg was much more interested in the high life of his position politically than he was getting anything accomplished. So really, Lyndon Johnson basically ran Kleberg's office for him. So he did more than just campaign for him. He basically ran the office because Congressman Kleberg was more interested in the high life or the fanciness, so to speak, of the position than actually getting anything done. So Lyndon Johnson basically served in a way as congressman, although Kleberg took responsibility and took the credit because it was his position. Okay? Well, during his time he worked for Richard Kleberg, Lyndon Johnson met a lady by the name of Claudia Alta Taylor. So during the time he served as a congressional secretary to Congressman Kleberg, he met a lady by the name of Claudia Alta Taylor, and they met on September 12th, 1934. On September 12th, 1934, Lyndon Johnson met a young lady by the name of Claudia Alta Taylor. But she was better known to her family and friends as what? Lady Bird. Okay, she was better known to family and friends as Lady Bird. They all referred to her as a Lady Bird. Anybody know how she got that name? Yep, on September 12th, 1934, was when Lyndon Johnson met a pretty young lady by the name of Claudia Alta Taylor, and she was better known to friends and family as Lady Bird. She actually got that name when she was 12. Anybody know how she got it? No, that's a good guess. A lot of kids say that she could sing. She actually had a nurse that thought she was just as pretty as a ladybird. Just made that comment one day when she was around the nurse, the family nurse, and she referred to Claudia as being as pretty as a ladybird. And as hard as that is to believe, that stuck from the time she was 12. She even signed, I have a picture of Lady Bird Johnson right up here with the president, and she signs it. It says, "Sincerely, Mrs. Lyndon B. Johnson," and she signs it Lady Bird Johnson. That's what she was known as her whole life, since the time she was 12. Now, their first date was a breakfast date. Long drive in the country, and Johnson proposed on their first date. Yeah, on their first date, which was a breakfast date, a drive in the country, Johnson proposed to Lady Bird Johnson. Now, I want you to look at those dates. Okay? He met her on September 12, 1934, right? She accepted his proposal, and 10 weeks later, they were married. 10 weeks later, on November 17, 1934. So he proposes to her on the first date
What was the date of that?
of the proposal.
Yeah.
Well, he met her on September 12, 1934. And I'm not sure if he went on a date that same day, but he proposed to her and they married 10 weeks after they first met on November 17, 1934. They got married in San Antonio, Texas. So that's quite a whirlwind romance, isn't it? From 10 weeks from meeting you to marrying you. They had children. They had 2 daughters, although Mrs. Johnson had she had 3 miscarriages. She had a very tough time having children, but they finally had 2 daughters. Linda, Lynda, was born in 1944. Linda, Lynda, 1944, and Lucy, Luci, 1947. So after 3 miscarriages, the couple had 2 daughters, Linda, Lynda, who was born in 1944, and Lucy, Luci, who was born in 1947. Well, what do you think Johnson did in 1937 after 3 years of marriage and working for Congressman Kleber? What did he decide he would do? He would run for Congress. And there was a election to fill the seat of James P. Buchanan. Okay, there was an election. It was kind of a weird election. So in 1937, after 3 years of marriage, Johnson decided to run for Congress, and he was going to run to fill the seat of James P. Buchanan. So if he's running to fill the seat of him, what do you think happened to him? Died in office. Okay? So James P. Buchanan, who was a congressman from Texas, died in office, and they had to have an election to fill his seat, and Johnson decided at that point it was time, and he ran. Well, what do you need to run a campaign? Money. And Johnsons weren't incredibly wealthy. When you're a congressional secretary, you're not raking in the dough. So Lady Bird had gotten $10,000 in inheritance from her mother's estate when she died, and she gave that money to her husband to start his political career. So the Johnsons had very little money. It just so happened that Lady Bird had inherited $10,000 from her mother's estate when her mother passed away, and she gave that money to her husband to start his political career. They're running in 1937, which is an odd number, so you know they're filling a seat of some kind because they're even years. Well, Johnson wins that seat, and he's elected to the House of Representatives, and then he decides to run for his own term in 1938 when Buchanan's expired. So think about this guy. We're not even done yet, but he filled an unexpired term of someone that died in office way back in 1937. Okay, then he was elected to his own term in 1938, and then he was re-elected again in 1940, because House of Representatives come open every 2 years. So he's elected in 1937 to fill the seat of James P. Buchanan, who died in office. Then he was elected to his own term in 1938, and then he was re-elected to another term in 1940. So by the time he served that much time, what did he want to do in 1941? After he'd served in the House, he wanted to go to the Senate. Okay, so in 1941, look at the number again. He announced he would run for United States Senator. But since it's 1941, what has happened?
Yes.
What?
We're getting World War II.
well, no,
Somebody else died.
somebody else died in office. So he again, when he ran for the Senate, a senator by the name of Morris Shepherd had died in office. So in 1941, Johnson ran for another unexpired term of a man that died in office. And he's running for the unexpired term of Senator Morris Shepherd.
He's in the office a lot, people died.
What's that?
He's in the office a lot.
Well, that's kind of amazing, yeah. Well, he didn't win this election. He actually lost this election. So he finished his term in the House. Okay, and we're gonna get to you, Josh Miller, in just a second. So he lost this Senate election, trying to fill the seat of United States Senator Morris Shepherd, and he finished his term in the House. But what happened in 1941 again, Josh? Right, Pearl Harbor resulted, and so what did Johnson do? He joined the United States Navy. Okay, that's what most people did, is join the armed services after Pearl Harbor. So after finishing his term in the House, after losing his Senate election, the events of Pearl Harbor resulted in Johnson joining the United States Navy. Well, he has I would say, an uneventful military career. That's nothing good, nothing bad. And after World War II ended, what did Johnson want to do again? Run for the Senate, okay? So, he's going to now run for the Senate again. It's going to be a wide open election because Morris Shepherd died and the guy that replaced him to beat Johnson is out of the picture. Now, Johnson's biggest challenge wasn't going to be in the general election, it was going to be in the primary, which means what? He's running against somebody of his own political party. And he would be running against a guy by the name of Coke Stevenson, who is a former governor of Texas. So both are Democrats, and they're going to run against each other. Coke Stevenson had just retired out of office as a governor the year before. He had his eyes set on the United States Senate to represent the Democratic Party, and so did Lyndon Johnson. So Johnson's biggest battle here is going to be in the primary election against Stevenson. It's not going to be the general election against the Republican candidate, it's going to be against Stevenson. So, when the dust cleared, Johnson actually beat Stevenson, 494,191 to 494,104. How many votes did he win by? If your math is any good. 87. And because of this election, and he didn't particularly like this, he got the nickname what? Landslide Lyndon, which he did not like, and Kennedy often referred to it when he was trying to give him some crap, and not to be teasing, but to be kind of mean. So he got the nickname Landslide Lyndon as a result of that big primary election for the Senate. Okay? Didn't like that nickname much. Well, he had no problem in the general election. He actually beat his Republican opponent 2-1. So the big election was this one. And he wins by just 87 votes, giving him the nickname Landslide Lyndon. And he was elected to the Senate in the general election. He defeated his Republican opponent 2-1. So he got into the Senate there. And he really did well. Moved his way up the chain pretty well. Other than being a senator, what would be the next highest position to hold in the Senate? No, in the Senate. Okay, the head of the Senate. What? Okay, but what's before that? Senate Minority Leader. So first you have a minority leader, then you have a majority leader. That's good. So in January of 1953, he was only 44 years old in January of 53, and he was elected Minority Leader of the Senate, which is the second most powerful person in the Senate. Minority Leader. Yep, in January of 1953, Johnson was elected Minority Leader of the Senate at just age 44. Minority Leader of the Senate. January 1953, he was elected Minority Leader of the Senate at the age of 44. He became the youngest man in American history to serve as Minority Leader at the time. Youngest man in American history. So in January of 53, he goes from a normal senator to the Minority Leader of the Senate at the age of 44, and becomes the youngest man ever to serve in that position in American history. Just 2 years later, at the age of 46, what does he become? Senate Majority Leader. Again, the youngest man in history to hold that position. So he works his way up through Congress pretty fast. In January of 53, elected Minority Leader at the age of 44. In January of 55, he's elected Majority Leader at the age of 46. Both times, he's the youngest man in American history to hold either one of those positions. Who is the President of the United States during the time he's serving as Majority Leader? Eisenhower. What political party is Eisenhower? Democrat or Republican? He's a Republican. And despite their party political differences, Johnson worked very well as Majority Leader with Eisenhower. They got along very well. That's normally not the case. How about who's the Majority Leader of the Senate now? Boehner? How well is he getting along with Obama? Every time they talk, they're criticized. It's just brutal. Well, Johnson wasn't like that. He worked very well with President Dwight D. Eisenhower, despite their political party differences. Well, in July of 1955, remember he's just 46 years old, he suffers a severe heart attack. So Johnson, in July of 1955, just 46 years old, suffers a severe heart attack. And where do you think he spends the next 5 weeks? What? You're almost right, you're just in the wrong city. So he's not at Parkland, where is he at? Where was the Kennedy autopsy done? Anybody remember? Bethesda Naval Hospital. Okay, so he spent the next 5 weeks at Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland, recovering. Yep, he was there 5 weeks. And Johnson didn't have the Kennedy wit, but he did have a little wit to him. And when Lady Bird came to visit him in the hospital shortly after his heart attack, Johnson mentioned to her that he, well, I don't know, this doesn't look very good. Might have about a 1 in 10 chance of surviving this deal. And she looked at him and she said, oh, Lyndon, don't worry about it, it'll be at least 50-50. Most people say, oh no, you're gonna, no, it's not, you don't have a 10% chance, it's 50-50. Anyway, she had a little bit of wit behind her, he not so much. Well, Johnson recovered from his heart attack and he worked harder than ever. I mean, he was a hard-working man. He was once quoted as saying, I never think of politics more than 18 hours a day. So that's the way he was. Very obsessed with his job. He worked very, very hard. After the heart attack especially, he was once quoted as saying, I never think of politics more than 18 hours a day. Now we know some of this. Johnson had intentions on the presidency in 1960. I don't know if you need to write this down, right? But who was nominated on the first ballot? John Kennedy. And Johnson had to settle for the vice presidential nomination and finally was elected vice president. This was not a positive time for him. He did not enjoy playing second fiddle to what he considered a less experienced man. And he was the most powerful man in the Senate. Now I'll assure you that the Senate Majority Leader in this country has much more power and influence than the Vice President of the United States. Now close friends and colleagues often stated that Johnson's years as Vice President were the most miserable time he spent in his life. Okay? So again, he became Vice President under Kennedy, did not like that. He thought he was playing second fiddle to a less experienced man. He had much more power when he served in the United States Senate, and close friends and colleagues stated often that Johnson's years as Vice President were probably the most miserable years of his entire life. We also know that after the assassination of President Kennedy in November of 1963, Lyndon Johnson became the nation's 36th president. Now we'll get into this and you'll learn more about it. He's going to finish Kennedy's presidency, which we're going to talk about in this test material. Then he's going to get elected to his own term in 1964 and kind of moves out of Kennedy's shadow. Okay? So he'll be elected to his own term in 1964. Now, could he run in 1968? Yes, because he didn't get elected to Kennedy's term, so to speak. Well, he chose not to run for re-election, which we'll talk about. Huge surprise to the American people, because of pressures of what? Vietnam War. Okay? Now, I do want you to write down this quote because it's important if you want to know something about Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson was a good president. He did a lot of good things, but his downfall was the war in Southeast Asia. And historians kind of sum up his downfall by saying this about the Vietnam War and Lyndon Johnson. They said he was obsessed by it, possessed by it, and ruined by it. And that's probably true, so again, I'll repeat that. According to historians, President Johnson's downfall was definitely the Vietnam War. And they were quoted as saying, as concerning Johnson and the Vietnam War, that, quote, he was obsessed by it, possessed by it, and ruined by it. And that's true. You will certainly hear that. Okay, we'll kind of tell you what happens after his, in the profile. After Richard Nixon was inaugurated in January of 1969, Johnson retired to his ranch in Texas after he left the presidency. And in 1972, he suffered a second heart attack and survived. So after leaving the presidency in January of 1969, he retired to his ranch in Stonewall. And what did he begin to do? What do all presidents do after they retire? Write their memoirs, and he did the same thing. And what else do presidents do after they retire? They gain funding to build a what? What's every president got? A presidential library, okay? Anybody want to guess where Lyndon Johnson's is located? Nope.
Johnson, Texas?
Nope, on the University of Texas campus in Austin. Okay, so if you're going to school at University of Texas, you go to the library, you're going to go to the Lyndon Baines Johnson Presidential Library. Well, as I mentioned, after he retired and after he began to publish his memoirs and after he had a library open, in 1972 he had a second heart attack and survived. Unfortunately for Johnson, on January 22nd, 1973, January 22nd, 1973, he had a third heart attack and died. So in 1972, President Johnson suffered a second heart attack and survived. Unfortunately, on January 22nd, 1973, former President Johnson had a third heart attack and did not survive and died. And where is he buried? On his ranch in Stonewall, Texas. So whatever became of Lady Bird? She went out, kind of mourned her husband for 6 months and got remarried and had a great life. She actually never remarried. And she dedicated her time and effort to 2 causes that are important. And you'll get to see one of them in Washington, D.C. So she dedicated her time and effort to 2 causes. One was the Highway Beautification Act, which is not something you'll see in D.C. How about, what's the Highway Beautification Act? You see it all over. You drive from here to Cowley, what are you going to see that is a representation of the Highway Beautification Act? Those blue signs that say the Kiwanis Club cleans this area or whatever, that's part of the Highway Beautification Act, which we'll talk about was one of the things Lyndon Johnson passed during his administration, that she was behind. But the thing she was most dear to, and really dedicated her life more to this, was the National Wildflower Research Center. The National Wildflower Research Center. Anybody know what that does? It's a nonprofit organization that devotes its time to what? Preserving and reintroducing native plants in planned landscapes. Okay? Now, when we walk from Arlington across the Potomac River Bridge, we will see a park that's dedicated to Lady Bird Johnson on wildflowers. Okay? She ended up dying, she died in 2007. She was 94 years old and was buried by her husband's side. Okay? 94 died in 2007, 94 years old, and is buried by her husband in Stonewall, Texas. See you later, Mort.